Welcome back to In the Loop, and after what feels like years of waiting, GPT-5 is finally here. So about a week on, opinion is quite divided. You've got many people saying this is revolutionary, but just as many people saying it's disappointing. You had on the launch event OpenAI showing bar charts that were just straight out lies, and you had prediction markets betting against OpenAI just minutes after their launch. So if you're sat here thinking, I have no idea what's going on, well, that's probably the only reasonable response you could have. In today's episode, you're going to learn everything that is worth knowing about this new model release. What's new, what's improved, and what was just a lot of good marketing. We've spent many hours collating all the research and reviews so you don't have to. This is In the Loop with Jack Horton. I hope you enjoyed the show. So before I get into the episode, I think it's important to set the scene and add just a little bit of context to this model release. For the past year, we've been living in basically model chaos. It feels like OpenAI has been throwing spaghetti at the wall when it comes to language models. We've had GPT-4, 4.5, the O series with different specialized models, and much of it felt sometimes like they were trying to justify a $200 per month price tag for their pro membership. And people were often so confused about which model they were going to use for this specific task of theirs that they had to even release white papers on it. And meanwhile, Anthropic has been completely eating away at their enterprise market. So particularly in coding, we've covered this in a number of episodes, but Claude Code and Anthropic's Claude language model has become the go-to choice for developers across the world. And I guess the general takeaway has been quite clear, which is most people would go to ChatGPT for general use, but for most people, if you're going to go do a coding task, you're going to go and use Claude. And I think this context frames the release of GPT-5 really well. This release wasn't just a better model. It was all about cleaning up this chaotic mess of different language models and trying to take back market share that they've lost over the last, I'd say 6, 9, and 12 months to Claude. Now, with that being said, let's get into it. And I think it's going to be really helpful to start with a high-level overview of some of ChatGPT-5's new features and abilities. So one of the first things you're going to notice since using the new ChatGPT-5 model is that it's called a hybrid model. And the reason this is noticeable is because it's got both thinking and non-thinking versions built into the exact same model. So previously, if you asked a question, unless you specified the O series or the thinking model, you wouldn't have any reasoning and thinking in any of the responses that you get from it. You'd have to specifically choose a reasoning model. And for those on a free tier, you've only got a limited number of queries on that. And in fact, initially, they actually called to deprecate many of their former models. So they completely took away ChatGPT-4, 4.1, the entire O series of models. There's been such a big uprising about this that Sam Altman's ended up releasing what is basically a small essay of tweets. And OpenAI actually bringing back many of the models that people loved into the subscription package for those paying $200 a month. This could be an episode on its own just due to the amount of, I guess, emotional attachment that people have clearly had to some of these models, and the fact that it was then taken away from them caused real upset online. Another new addition is that you're going to now be able to short circuit its thinking when it goes into a thinking loop for a question that, to be honest, was quite simple. It's also going to be available to everybody, so including all free users. I think they really learned from the DeepSeek saga last year that everyone must experience their best models. And there are also 3 versions of ChatGPT-5. We have the standard one, the mini one, and the nano. So if you then hit usage limits on one model, it will automatically switch to another model. It also has a massive context window, which is, for me, a huge improvement. Its context window is now 400,000 tokens, which is larger than all previous models. And if I put that into context, that's about 300,000 words. And again, if you listen to the episode on context engineering a few weeks ago, context is the ability for the agent to have a set of information when you ask it a question. So it could be a long part of a copy and paste of information. In document terms, that's about 600 to 800 pages of text it can keep in its short-term memory when you're having a conversation with it. And previous models were about 128,000 tokens. So that's 96,000 words. So that jump from 96,000 words of information it can store in its memory when you're having a conversation with it to now 300,000 is a huge, huge leap. There's nothing more annoying than putting information into a model and hitting a wall because of a context limit. Another huge addition has been coding and front-end creation just using ChatGPT. They've clearly gone all out to also try and take Livable's market share. It now has a really good understanding of spacing and typography and even white space and design. You can vibe code entire user interface really, really simply. And in fact, in the actual press release, which I really highly recommend you go and check out, they provide a load of prompts that can generate really cool applications. And this is the exact reason that Sam Altman recently came out and said that this is the fast fashion era of technology. We'll get into this a little bit more throughout the episode, but you want to keep it top of mind. They've also really lowered the barrier of price. It's now much, much cheaper. You're paying about $10 per 1 million tokens. And output tokens, by the way, is the number of words it uses when it responds to you. For the same 1 million tokens that you pay $10 for with OpenAI, you're actually having to pay $75 for Opus One, so that's Claude's good model. So that pricing is absolutely crazy. It's 10 times cheaper than Claude, which is, to be honest, really difficult to say no to. And it's actually been reported that API usage, so companies using ChatGPT inside their application or existing workflows and systems, has doubled in the last few days of the ChatGPT launch and kept on growing subsequently after that launch. And it's been reported that the usage of OpenAI's API, so that's using their language models inside existing software, actually doubled within just the first 48 hours of ChatGPT-5 coming out. This is clearly an aggressive pricing strategy designed to win back market share, especially in that coding space where Anthropic has grown rapidly. And finally, they've launched what they describe as a unified system, but that basically means that they've added a router, which quickly decides which model is going to be used to perform that task. And that's going to be based on the complexity of the tool type, so if it needs to do a web search tool or maybe the type of question that's been asked. All of that sounds really cool. And to be honest, the main area they've invested in clearly is the coding space. And to be honest, if you just watched their entire launch video, if you had no context on what OpenAI did, you would probably assume that they are predominantly a coding application. So as we go into what the independent benchmarks say, I think that's a really important thing to keep top of mind. Now, as you will know, I'm not a massive fan of these benchmarks, to be honest. I think it's a game that all of them play, and they're all obviously going to try and make each other look as best they possibly can on launch day. But I think it gives us, an initial gauge of whether there's been a big leap or not. Artificial analysis, which is the gold standard for independent AI benchmarks, found that when ChatGPT was tested and it used its reasoning, it was the best model out there. However, when GPT-5 didn't have reasoning, it performs closer to GPT 4.1's level. This matters because actually what it shows us is, again, that OpenAI isn't selling us one model. They're selling an entire new packaging and pricing system. This minimal version that most people, to be honest, will often get is basically just their old models. And their high reasoning version that gets the incredible flashy headlines about coming first place in the most important benchmarks is going to be rarely used. So through very clever pricing and packaging, they're trying to increase the perception of value across all their tiers. And if you think about what that means for, say, competition, Anthropic might charge premium prices for Claude because they position it as consistently high quality. But OpenAI has built a new packaging and pricing system that enables them to undercut Claude and other model providers, all by using that router system, which is automatically routing people to different models. And subsequently, OpenAI has announced that they're going to bring out the ability for you to understand which model's being used more often, which for me is a really big win because I personally haven't been trusting the quality of responses, and I can't help but think, am I getting the rubbish models and still paying money for it? When it comes to coding benchmarks, Vellum's analysis found that Grok 4, GPT-5, and Claude Opus are all performing at a very similar level on the SWE bench. Though ChatGPT did come first place in many of the other coding benchmarks like Design Arena. And so even though ChatGPT has leapt to the number one best performing model in many coding benchmarks, Grok 4, so Elon Musk's language model, still actually gets the best marks on some of the hardest types of assessments. On the ARC AGI 2 test, which is designed basically to measure abstract reasoning that's more like human problem solving. The kind of figure it out yourself thinking that humans have to do when they've never actually seen a specific problem before. Well, Grok 4 scores highest on that assessment at 15.9%, while ChatGPT-5 actually lags behind at less than 10%, so 9.9%, which is a huge gap. So in short, ChatGPT-5 is faster, it's better at coding, it's cheaper, but across many of the reasoning benchmarks, it's not as good. But that's just the benchmarks, and as we all know with language models, it's just as much about the vibes. And certainly there's been a lot of noise and conversation about those vibes with ChatGPT-5. And that's included very divided opinions. So on Polymarket, which is a decentralized prediction market, so you can bet on whether Apple's going to bring out a foldable phone in 2026, they actually placed 80% odds on OpenAI having the best leading AI model by the end of August, before the demo. And then Google was lagging behind at just 20%. But by the time Sam Altman and the OpenAI team walked off that stage, the tide had completely turned, and Google surged to 85% and OpenAI to 14%. So that's only 14% of bettors believe that OpenAI will have the best model in 2026, from 80% to 14%. I think this speaks volume on the divided opinion that people have got around this new model release. During the ChatGPT-5 release, there was also, let's call it chart crime. OpenAI showed off several charts on the screen as they spoke to demonstrate how good ChatGPT-5 really is. And it honestly left me baffled. So it's hard to explain, but if you're on a podcast platform that has video, we'll actually show the bar chart because it's hilarious. They had bars that were next to each other, but drastically different percentage outcomes. So we had one bar that got a 69% score on coding deception, another one next to it that got 30.8, but they were displayed as identical bar heights, while the ChatGPT-5 results were 52.8%, yet was visually showed as being much, much bigger than the other bars that were at 69% and 30%. It's criminal. Sam Altman addressed it afterwards and said it was a mega chart screw-up from them, but I guess many people were claiming that they vibe coded it using ChatGPT. You have Professor Ethan Mollick predicting that you're going to see a lot of varied results posted online about ChatGPT-5 because it's using multiple models in its responses, some of which are very good and some of which are, to be honest, meh. And since the underlying model selection isn't very transparent, it becomes very confusing. And this is exactly my experience so far. They also had to do a massive patch just after their release because usage went through the roof and everything started to fail, including that auto switcher, so switching to different models. And as a result, it just started putting every single person on the worst possible model. This blog by Matt Schumer, I think, captures the broader market reaction really, really well. And he said, when I started using it, I wasn't blown away. And in fact, I felt very let down, given all of this hype and a massive expectation around it. But what Schumer said was that if you're using ChatGPT-5 for tasks that the previous O3 models or even the Claude Sonnet can do really well, then you're not really going to get a gauge of how good it is. To see how good this truly is, you have to ask it to do things that AI simply can't do very easily. And in short, that is coding. And I think this gets to the meat of what OpenAI have clearly obsessed over getting right. Because the vibe coding revolution is here. And that means it's the era of creating things all of the time. Before I go into some of the examples of what's been built on ChatGPT-5, I just wanted to quickly stop and acknowledge that we're growing incredibly fast. And according to the stats, only 45% of you listening right now are following us or are subscribed. So if you could press that button on your podcast app, that would help so, so much. A shed load of effort goes into every episode, and that number is part of what makes it worth it. So the vibe coding revolution really is here. And Matthew Burnham, who has 480,000 subscribers on YouTube, actually focuses all on AI coding. And he got access to the model quite early, and he built a bunch of really, really cool things. So you had ChatGPT-5 generate several very specific applications to test its vibe coding abilities. Again, if you're watching the video, we'll put them on the screen, but he made a jumping ball runner game. So a simple game that, although is very basic, was functional. He created a pixel art tool, so an entire application that you can draw things on, and it can change colors. He said it was a bit laggy, but not too bad. There was also a game he generated which measures your typing speed, so which is a functional typing test that essentially tracked the accuracy and speed of you typing out words. The game even included proper feedback and scoring systems. He also created a drum simulator, which is an interactive music application that you could literally make music on. And finally, a tool that visualizes music and lo-fi, which is also just really, really cool. So the fact that you don't need to go to another application now. ChatGPT literally does this for you from a single prompt. And this is the world of vibe coding. Every application is now a vibe coding application. I think another fantastic review, and one that I wanted to note because I really, really enjoyed the reading, was one by Latent Space. And it was one of the more nuanced and philosophical pieces on ChatGPT-5, and they called it the Stone Age. This wasn't a criticism. This is a reflection of where they think we are in human civilization right now. Because this is one of the first models that excels at using tools during conversations, just as humans did a long, long time ago. So as they put it, the Stone Age marked the dawn of human intelligence, but what exactly made it so significant is the fact that we shaped tools and our tools shaped us. So I guess what does all this mean for Anthropic? So the threat to Anthropic is really interesting because apparently, according to reports, both Cursor and GitHub Copilot drive approximately $1.2 billion of Anthropic's $4 billion revenue. So that is just two applications built and using Claude every single day as part of their application that is driving most of their revenue, well, 30% of it anyway. And with ChatGPT's new model coming out and its incredible abilities with coding and costing 7 times less than Claude's models, well, it's going to be hard for an enterprise customer to say no. And lots of coding applications like Livable, Cursor, and others have made ChatGPT-5 their default model. Again, because Claude has brought out Claude Code, which is actually a competitor to many of the companies that are using their language model. Many of those companies have now jumped straight to OpenAI to make it their default model. This doesn't mean that developers will not choose Claude still, but it's certainly a massive risk to Anthropic. So I guess to conclude, ChatGPT represents both impressive technical achievements and, really importantly, very aggressive competitive strategies against Anthropic. For coding, it appears to have made a huge leap forward. But for other applications, the improvements feel incredibly incremental and, to be honest, overall disappointing. This was just as much of a business model change disguised as technical leaps, because OpenAI have just built a system where they can offer cheaper language models to everybody with minimal reasoning while still manage to claim that they have the very best model on the market. And obviously it's working. Cursor switched overnight, prediction markets lost confidence in OpenAI, and Anthropic is watching 30% of their revenue become potentially vulnerable to their pricing. And I guess anecdotally, the chart crimes, the very mixed reviews, the expectation gaps are probably a symptom of now a maturing market where these revolutionary AI narratives just don't quite work in the same ways they used to. The real story here is whether ChatGPT can write better code, write better content, and solve real problems for everyday people. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed that deep dive into ChatGPT 5. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next week.